we become more aware that where our attention and focus goes, the energy flows. What I mean by this is that if we focus on the future, if we're focused on some catastrophic event potentially happening, which may or may not happen, if we focus on that with some real effort, there's a pretty good chance we're going to end up stressing ourselves out or end up becoming really quite anxious because of what we're focusing on. Likewise, say for example you had a really traumatic upbringing, parenthood, maybe mum or dad wasn't there, or perhaps you've experienced a type of abuse, right? Many people have in life. If you focus on this all day, every single day, really try to immerse yourself in the memory, think about it, try to reimagine it and relive it and relive it and relive it, guess how you're going to feel? You're going to feel pretty darn traumatized. All right? This is why I have a real problem with many expressions of therapy today. You have like trauma counselors, for example, and I've interacted with people, not on a personal level, on a professional level, with people who practice trauma counselling with clients. So a client comes in who's experienced trauma, and the trauma counsellor's role is to get this person to revisit the trauma and think about it and feel it and experience it and make peace with it. This is kind of like jumping in the fire and expecting not to get burned. All right? Does that even make sense? Life's an interesting thing. Everyone has a history. Yesterday is history. Tomorrow is a mystery. There's no guarantee that we're even going to have a tomorrow. Right? All we really ever have is today. Time within itself is a man-made concept. Right? Time doesn't actually exist. Watches exist, iPhones with the time on exist, Big Ben exists, clocks exist, but time as a concept within itself is just a concept. It doesn't exist. All we ever have is now. So because of this time concept, right, people genuinely think that there is a past and that there is a future. Now, this might seem like a bit of an abstract idea, but I'm doing my best to really shake up your mind here a little bit, to get you reflecting about some stuff. What happens if there is no past? What happens if there is no future? What happens if there's just one very, very long now? Because now is all that we ever have. You're watching me right now. You're listening to me right now. You're thinking about something right now. You're perhaps becoming a bit more aware of yourself right now. Could you imagine how you would experience life if you just learned how to focus on now, all of the time? And you stop thinking about past nows, and you stop stressing yourself out about what future nows may or may not contain, and just lived now. Do you reckon you'd be able to find yourself in a position where you can actually make the most of your life, perhaps take greater risks, do your best, just be yourself right now, because now is all we have. Life is just a succession of nows. Right, interesting concept, isn't it? But this extended self, it's useful for us to develop an awareness without focusing on different parts of our timeline, right, if time even exists. We've learned things as we've gone. We've had relationships, we've had experiences, we've assigned meanings onto these experiences. And these experiences and those meanings that we've assigned onto these experiences is what gives us memories. The things that we remember are the things that we respond to now. We respond to every memory now. All right? I shared a story a few weeks ago. Now, when I was studying counselling, actually, maybe 10 years or so ago, one of the theories, I think it was an exercise from when I was studying psychoanalytical psychology. One of the exercises was, how present is your past? And what I was asked to do, this was purely a self-reflective exercise, was to look at a habit or a behavioural habit that I kind of succumb to today, frequently, and trace it back to a starting point. So trace this attitude or this behaviour back to its initial root. Because many people go through life thinking, this is just the way that I am. I act and behave this way. It's just me. It's just how I am. No, no, no. Every cause has an effect. Every effect has a cause. Right? Nothing happens alone in isolation. This is one of the key assumptions that we make as cognitive behavioural therapists. So I'm not inviting you to debate here, right? I'm teaching you cognitive behavioural therapy, which is grounded in cognitive psychology. This is the primary presupposition that we operate out of. So agreement and disagreement is irrelevant. All right? What is relevant is consideration to see how it may be true or how it may not be true. Agreement, disagreement doesn't work in this. So I'd found myself for many, many years really frustrated. I would kind of rebel against people who I perceived as being in positions of authority, and I never understood why. I would sometimes find myself getting angry, frustrated, and here my counselling lecturer said, right, Kain, I want you to explore it. I want you to track it back. Go back and reflect, where did this start? And it took me a couple of weeks, actually, to get clear. So I was studying counselling as like a 31, 32-year-old man, and it took me back to maybe the age of 11 or 12, and I had to really work hard to reflect upon this. And it was actually a school trip that I went on. I must have been 12 years old, and my entire year group in school were spending a night in the Lake District in Northern England, camping out, doing water activities, yachting, kayaking, all that kind of thing. But in order to partake in the water activities, one needed a letter of permission from one's parents. Right, so the entire year group got their letters of permission from the parents, bar one. Guess who that person was? Me. That's right. And my dad wasn't bothered. He was like, yeah, whatever. Just whatever your mum's decision is, that's final. All right, and I said, oh my goodness, I'm not getting what I want, having an emotional thing back then. But my mum was scared, right? Something might happen to you. I said, but Mum, if I don't do this, something even worse is going to happen to me. I'm going to get bullied, I'm going to get called names, all this kind of thing. So what happened was I ended up going on the camping trip, but I just didn't have permission to partake in the water activities the next morning. Now I knew deep down inside that if the rest of this kind of school group was to understand or learn that I didn't get permission of my mum, I was going to get mocked. People get bullied for a whole lot less in school. Kids can be vicious, as I'm sure you're aware. So I can remember, that next morning, I set my alarm clock on my watch, my old Casio watch, beep, 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 and it was something like 6:30. Got myself out of bed, and I had a tin of beans at the ready, and I had a carton of orange juice made from concentrate with absolutely zero nutritional value. And I took myself out of my sleeping bag and exited the tent and walked down to this play park, sat in a swing, ate a tin of beans, full tin of beans, and chugged back this entire carton of orange juice from concentrate. And I stood there for 5 minutes, give myself a good truffle shuffle, give myself a good shake around, jumped around, ran around the swings a couple of times, then stuck my fingers down my throat and projectile. Now, okay, you may be saying, Kain, that's a little bit graphic. Why are you sharing this with us? I'm sharing this with you for a reason. Because I done everything within my power, right, to cover up the evidence that I wasn't allowed. What I was able to do that day was deceive my teachers into thinking that I was unwell. And I managed to save my reputation because all the rest of the kids thought that I'd given myself food poisoning. So I ended up being perceived as the hero, which is ridiculous, but listen, we're talking about how young people, or how some young people think. So essentially, the reason why I tell you all of this was because from that point onwards, I had developed such a strong such a strong will against people who would tell me what I can and cannot do, right? Possibly one of my most prominent values, my greatest priorities in life has always been freedom. I want to be free, a free person. No one likes living a life having rules impressed or imposed upon them. And that was where that began for me. So anytime I would interact with a person who I perceived to be in a position of authority, who would say, Kain, you can do that, you can't do this, you can't do this, you must do this, you mustn't do that, I would have this automatic kind of sense of rebellion against them, because it was authority, which I'd grown to learn back then was detrimental to my well-being. All right, so it's a story. You might think it's completely irrelevant, but it was hugely relevant to me. You've got to understand. So the reason why I share this is to give you an example of how it is that I've come to gain appreciation of my own extended self. This is just another level of self-awareness when we grow to actually understand the reasons why we act and behave sometimes. Because when we do, if we can then identify the way in which we're acting or behaving that might be detrimental to progression in our lives, we can make changes. But we can't make changes in areas of our life that we're not aware of. We need to be aware in order to change and grow. All right. There's then the private self. Awareness of our own thoughts, our own feelings, and our own motives. So what I've kind of done here, I've kind of tied these in just a little bit. Are you aware of what drives your behaviour? Do you know what you really want in life? I remember having I think it was a conversation, it might have been the same counselling teacher actually, all those years ago, kind of collared me once. She said, Kain, you're a very driven man. And I said, oh, thank you very much. Yes, I am really driven. She followed up with another question. She says, I wonder what it is exactly that drives you. Oh, I don't know. Never thought of that before. All right, and many people do this, right? I reckon you're driven. What are you driven by? Have you ever considered? What is it that actually drives you? What do you actually want? What would make your life look and feel and be effective? What does effectiveness look like for you? Do you know? Right, this is essentially us understanding our private self. Are you aware of the thoughts that occupy your mind? Have you ever considered where your thoughts come from? Because I know we have lots of thoughts, don't we? Do we create our own thoughts? Do we make them up? Do we put our thoughts inside of our heads? Intentionally or unintentionally, or do they come from somewhere else? And again, this is something that we can only theorize about. There is no scientific data, there is no human being that can pull out his or her microscope to tell us where thoughts come from. No one even knows what a thought actually is. Some people will say, oh, it's a neurological impulse. Doesn't give us any insight. Right? That's just kind of irrelevant as to what it is, what colour it is. What is a thought? Where did they come from? Think about it. Right? Now, it's easy to identify the fact that we focus on some thoughts that pop into our heads. But if you think about what I've just said here, thoughts that pop into our heads, where did they pop into our heads from? Right? Now, I don't have any answers, right? I'm just saying that it is possible to become this aware when thoughts pop into our heads. Oh, hang about, where did that thought come from? Right, that's not a helpful thought. No, going to dismiss that one. Sometimes thoughts pop into my head saying, Kain, you're absolutely useless. You're no good. Oh, you're a stuff up. You've screwed up. All that sort of thing. So there are some thoughts that pop into our heads that we want to acknowledge, we want to run with, and there are some that we just want to dismiss and run away from. You catching what I'm cooking? Cool. So an alternative level of self-awareness, our private self. Our conceptual self is about our awareness of our awareness. Are you aware of how aware you are? Are you aware of your awareness? Are you aware of how self-aware other people are at? Because when we reach this level of self-awareness, we can become significantly effective in our relationships. We can become significantly efficient in how it is that we use and invest our time, because we can see where people are at. Right? There's a word called discernment, which is kind of like insight. We can see where people are at. We can see when people are listening to us. We can see when people are actually hearing us. We can see when people are understanding us. We can see when people are interested in understanding us. We can also see when people are not interested in listening to us or in understanding us at all, because they've already made their assumptions and the judgments. All right? When we become completely aware of our own awareness, we automatically become aware, fully socially aware of other people. It allows us to spend our time well. All right? Allows us to hold an objective perspective. And some people will say, well, I don't think that anything could be truly objective. That's just from the level of awareness that you're currently at. All right? It is possible to be completely objective, 100%. But it takes some time and it takes a lot of hard work on self. All right? This isn't just state of existence that one can reach through taking an online course or reading a book. This is a state of existence that one can reach when one has worked on oneself for years. All right, but it's worth it. All right, it really is, because you're going to be able to see without a shadow of a doubt who's for you, who's not for you, the things that you really want to say yes to and the things that you don't want to say yes to at all. Helps you make wiser and well-informed decisions. Conceptual self, when we reach this level of awareness, we have a strong and a healthy sense of identity. I mean, think about what some of the younger generations are doing today. They're kind of running around defining themselves by their gender, by their sexual preferences, by their religious beliefs. And when I say younger generations, I'm certainly not generalizing people of a certain age range. I'm actually generalizing people of a certain maturity range. Right? Maturity in life is certainly not to be determined by age, because it can't be. I like to propose that maturity is more determined by acceptance of responsibility. A person's to assume complete responsibility for all aspects of their life, which therefore means that it's possible for a 16-year-old to be very mature. And it's also possible for a 65-year-old to be highly immature. It depends on how much responsibility one has taken for one's life. I had a conversation recently with a 64, 65-year-old who had never worked a day in their life, an opinion about everything, an opinion about everyone, all right? An attitude that was absolutely repulsive. Oh my goodness, what an irresponsible person. You've taken no responsibility for that which is rattling around inside of your mind. And within a few days, I had a conversation with, I think it was a 19-year-old actually, who'd actually spent maybe 7 or 8 years in the so-called care system. Here in the UK, we've got the care system, and this is for those boys and girls who are given up by their parents or perhaps removed from the parents because parents weren't fit to parent or something like this. And this young man had spent however many years in foster care, going from home to home to home to home, and he'd become so self-sufficient. All right, I think he'd struggled with a few behavioural issues, perhaps in his earlier teens, around about 15 or 16, but he'd actually woken up to his senses and realised from around about the age of 16 onwards that unless I take responsibility for my life and what I want, then no one else is gonna, because no one else cares. Now, that might sound like a really sad thing, but I'm going to propose that's a really mature thing. All right, I'm going to propose there's a lot of people in their 30s and 40s and 50s who would really benefit from adopting this attitude in life. All right, why is it that there's waiting lists outside of the therapist's office, right? Outside of the counsellor's office, men and women who are waiting for another human being to manage their emotions for them, to solve their problems. There's a fascinating thing about problems, and this is that until problems have owners, problems will remain unsolved. Right? There's absolutely no one else in this world who's going to commit to solving your problems for you, because everyone else in the world has enough of their own problems and tensions. All right, so conceptual self. At some point in our life, we will make a decision, not about who we are in a fixed and limited way. We're not going to make a decision about who we are for the purposes of, getting some social approval or validation or fitting in with certain types of people, right? This is for people of a certain level of maturity. I am this. I'm flying this flag today, and tomorrow, based on how I feel, I might be flying that flag instead. A gentleman named Mr. Erik Erikson, back in the 1960s, he came up with a complete developmental psychological model about this. He says that people generally between sort of 17 and maybe 26, 27 spend this bulk of their life, their primary question is, who am I? What is my identity? Some people arrive at incorrect assumptions, end up getting into their 40s or 50s or 60s and say, I am this, I am authority, you will respect me, Nah. Respect isn't something that can be commanded or demanded. Respect is something that can only be earned after people over a period of time have come to appreciate and identify that we are people of substance, we are consistent, we are reliable, we are sincere, we are integral, and I therefore want to propose that it is terms like this that we can use to identify with that allows us boundless opportunity for growth. Did you catch that? That was a bit of a wisdom-based nugget for you right there. All right, when we can learn to identify in virtue, when we can learn how to, or when we are willing to identify in the opportunity that we have for growth, we will grow. We unbind ourselves. We step out of limitation. We step out of restriction. We have a tendency of stepping out of frustration. It no longer matters how other people see us, how we are perceived or how we're received, because we instead, in this place, are just devoted to the process of becoming the most effective, the most efficient, the wisest and the best versions of ourselves that we can possibly become. In concept, all right, this is essentially what gives us a sense of vision for our future, who it is that we can grow to become. I mean, you can define yourself by your gender, you can define yourself by your sexual orientation, you can define yourself by your role, you can define yourself by your job title, you could define yourself, if you want to, by your successes, by your wins, or by your failures, if you want to go beat yourself up for the rest of your life. You can define yourself by the mistakes that you've made. You can define yourself by your wins, by your losses. You can define yourself by the labels that society will very, very quickly and freely assign onto you. You can define yourself by a mental disorder. You can define yourself by an emotion. You can define yourself by your beliefs, by your religious ideology. You can define yourself by the political party that you believe in the most. Or you can identify in virtue. What does it look like to identify in virtue? What does it look like to enter into this place of conceptual self? I am growing. I am improving. I am increasing. I am developing. I am growing in sincerity. I am growing in integrity. I am growing in honesty. I am growing in authenticity. I'm growing in creativity. I'm growing in passion. I'm growing in compassion as I grow to better understand humanity. As I grow to better appreciate the connection between our thoughts and our feelings and our behaviours, I come to better appreciate why it is that people say and do the things that they do. And it's not that human beings go out of their way to mess up in life, but yet it happens. But yet it happens. Many people end up in this place of destitution in life, not through their own choosing, just because they were never shown a better way of living life. And this is what makes cognitive psychology and cognitive behavioural therapy such a valuable body of ideas that we really want to consider building into our lives. Because when we understand some of this stuff, we can begin to step outside of the box. We can begin to step outside of the limiting habits, the attitudes, the beliefs, the ideologies that might have served us for a season of life, but perhaps aren't serving us so well today. Now, I'm speaking to you as student. But could you imagine what might happen if you were to share an idea such as this with some people that you know who are struggling in the midst of self-pity or low confidence or low self-esteem? Could you imagine how much hope this might give some people if you were to suggest to them, life can be better than this, you can be more than this, I know you can be better than this. Let us have a look at how it is that you could define yourself that would give you opportunity to grow. Because when people are operating in life from this place of low confidence or low self-esteem, it triggers anxiety, it triggers sadness, it triggers depression, all of the things that the world of psychiatry has created a whole range of stigmatic labels for. But that doesn't present us with any solution. It just creates us different variations of the problem. The solution is personal growth. And personal growth only happens as we become more acquainted in and of ourselves.